Welcome to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we equipped you to more effectively lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. Each week, we help you sharpen your leadership acumen by cracking open the playbooks of dynamic leaders who are doing big things in their professional endeavors. And now your host, leadership tactics and organizational development expert, Karen Farrell Rhodes.
Hello, my superstars. This is Karen, and welcome to another episode of the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast. We are just over the moon today to have a fantastic guest to present to you. His name is Andrew Oxley, and Andrew is the founder and CEO of the Oxley Group, which is an executive and leadership coaching firm that focuses on bottom line results for their organizations. Now, Andrew's insights into the dynamics that drive business performance are woven into the fabric of his book that's called The 4 Faces of Frustration. What a fantastic name for a book. I cannot wait for us to learn more about what he writes about those 4 faces of frustration, because I know we've all experienced them in one way, shape, or form before. But he has shared that in the book that he explains the reasons why companies and their leaders struggle to create customer loyalty and employee engagement. So welcome to the podcast, Andrew.
Well, thank you very much, Karen. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, we're so happy to have you. As I said, your book really touches on a hot button that constantly goes on in companies and organizations, and it has for hundreds of years. But we're very excited to hear your perspectives. But before we do so, we always love to learn just a little bit more about our guests. So for just as much as you feel comfortable, can you give us a sneak peek into your life outside of work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I live just northeast of Atlanta with my beautiful wife and our 4 children. And we live up here on Lake Lanier. So love spending time outdoors and enjoying all the activities that we can get up to on the lake.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And many of my listeners know that I too am based in Metro Atlanta, a bit of ways from Andrew, but we're all in the Metro Atlanta family, I love to say. And Lake Lanier is a beautiful place. So I have been there many times and love their buffet, Andrew. They have a fantastic seafood buffet. I'm sure you've partaken in that a bit, but Atlanta's a great place to be.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And let's kind of jump into our topic today. Before we go to the book, can you share with us just a high level of your professional career and what led you to starting the Oxley Group?
Yeah, well, so I actually came a very circuitous route to the career I'm in today. I like to say I have none of the traditional qualifications that you would expect someone to have in an executive coaching position. I actually am a recovering engineer. I'm a little embarrassed to say that, but I am. And I was actually in the 25% of the class that made the top 75% possible. And I'm very proud of that. But in my final year of engineering school, a business professor took me aside and said, "Hey, you should go sell something technical, because you're probably really good at sales, but you're not going to be a great engineer." And I'm so grateful for him. His name was Professor Jack Lemon. So I went and started selling commercial air conditioning in Toronto for a firm called Train Canada, obviously a subsidiary of the Train USA. And I worked there for 7 years, and it was a great career. It enabled me to experience all sorts of personal success early in life. I like to say it accelerated my progress towards my midlife crisis. One day I woke up in Toronto, and in Toronto, or in Canada, the equivalent of the Wall Street Journal is the Globe and Mail. And so I picked up the Globe and Mail this one particular morning. You may remember newspapers. They used to deliver them, to the
I do. I'm old enough to know.
Yeah. So I picked it up this one particular morning, and in the bottom right-hand corner, they always had this thing called Your Morning Smile. And it was supposed to get your day off with a hop in your step. And this particular morning, the morning smile is: the problem with the rat race is even if you win, you're still a rat. And I remember shaving that morning, looking at myself in the mirror and thinking, I'm just going to be a big fat rat. That's all I'm going to be. I'm going to be a big fat rat sitting up here in Toronto. And I made a decision I wanted to change my life. And now, the reason I made the decision was incorrect, but the decision was correct. I actually thought the problem was my job. The problem was not my job. The problem was the way I was executing my role within that job. And but I'm glad I made that decision because it embarked me on a journey to try to understand how to have balance in your life, how to have great business results and still enjoy all that life has to offer. Because a lot of times we experience all sorts of success, but we don't really experience full success because it takes so much out of us. And we arrive home at the end of the day exhausted and tired and stressed and frustrated. So I embarked on this career to try to figure it out for myself. And now I've been able to help literally thousands of leaders understand how to experience true success in their life, drive organizational performance while not feeling at the end of the day like they're just spent.
Okay, so Andrea, if you have figured that out, you need to put that in a bottle and sell it because you will become a trillionaire 100 times over. So I'm very, very curious to learn about your insights. And so, but before we go that, I'm just curious, since you are such an active coach and this crazy world dynamic that we have right now, with the evolutions in technology and workforces and how work gets done and the increasing challenges of leaders to kind of lead through all of this volatility and change. I'm curious what maybe one or two top level trends you're seeing from your coaching clients right now that they're really trying to tackle.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. COVID actually packed about 10 years of change into 18 months, and
It sure
it, it,
did.
it was trends we were seeing in the marketplace for a long time before that. But what was sort of probably marginally acceptable is no longer acceptable. Employees, and it started with the young generation. They started not accepting things that maybe my generation thought were normal, and you just had to pay your dues. And they're like, no. No, we don't. We want to move fast. We want to learn. We want to know what you plan on doing to help us develop. And what we've seen is that this is cascaded up through the generations now, and we're seeing it's not a generational issue. Now, I will tell you, most leaders that I talk to, their favorite saying right now is "young people today."
Yeah.
And I'll just say two things about that. First of all, I'm pretty sure our parents said the same thing about us.
Yeah.
And second of all, it's not just young people. And complaining about young people is like yelling at the wind. The
That's
wind
right.
is no different and you're exhausted. So
That's right.
so that's one big change we're seeing, that you cannot lead people the same way. You must lead them differently. And to be perfectly honest, is the way you need to lead them is nothing new. It's the way we should have been leading people all along.
All
It's
along.
just now it's an economic mandate where leaders could sort of get away with it for a while, but you can't anymore. You really cannot. So that's one big change we're seeing in the marketplace right now. The other one that we're seeing in the marketplace is that organizations have given up on traditional training and development, and they realized that the workshop model of butts and seats and how cheaply can we train people just is not effective. So they're really working hard on evaluating their training systems to see if they're truly effective and are they delivering the actual results we're looking for.
I see that as well quite a bit. And what's interesting I found is that, most companies are not necessarily looking to eliminate all training. They're just trying to reimagine or rethink how to best leverage that investment or those dollars to
Without question.
truly impact the organization. And they're not totally sold that all training is the right way to go, but they are still looking for solutions
Yes.
or approaches, I guess we could
Yeah,
say. Are
I
you
would.
seeing that too?
Yeah, I would completely agree. I mean, uh, training and development is critical to the success of organizations, right? And
Right.
most of the clients we work with are very high growth companies. And when you're growing, you have to be growing leadership within your team, because if you don't, you have to hire leaders from outside. And while that's sometimes the right thing to do, dilutes your culture in general if you do too much of it, and you end up with a company that you don't recognize anymore.
That's right.
Uh, so you have to find a way to develop the leaders. So I would agree with you. I don't think companies have given up on training and development. I think they're trying to evaluate it with a much more critical eye as to, are we getting what we want from this training, rather than looking at the old methodology used to be, butts and seats. How quickly can we, or how cheaply can we train people? And usually, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with that training. It's not that the training is bad or the trainers are bad. The problem is that If you just take the idea of leadership, for example, leadership is not complicated
Mm-mm.
in
Mm-mm.
concept. It's
No.
complicated in application.
And
So if you put someone
execution.
in a classroom for 3 hours and you teach them some stuff that they probably already knew, they're
Yeah.
like, yeah, great. The problem
Yeah.
is I don't know how to do that when I get back on the job.
That's exactly
And
right.
therein lies the rub.
So you took the words right out of my mouth. We'll let you answer our signature question closer to the end of the podcast. That whole research came out of trying to understand the root cause of why leadership development interventions did not have the results that organizations and leaders wanted them to. And what it really boiled down to is that we just do not teach or support leadership execution. And that's a whole nother competency skill set that is very important. You can't just teach people skills and then leave them be and not hope that they figure out, how to do it in their day-to-day roles, or they learn the skills because they become rusty because they just don't know how to apply them. So the whole point of teaching them how to execute on the skills that they have learned and being there to know when to pivot or change is a very important skill set that a lot of companies just don't focus on.
I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to your wonderful book, The Four Faces of Frustration: How to Turn Frustration into Delight. And I know we all would love to know more about that. And I was fascinated that you wrote the book as a parable, and humans love stories. But share with us a little bit more about what inspired you to write the book, and maybe some top tips or thoughts that came out of the book that you would love to leave with our listeners.
Yeah. And I guess one of the reasons why it's ironic that I do what I do today is because I would have been elected the most likely to fall asleep during training in my previous career. Uh, and part of the reason was it's usually taught by someone who knows nothing about what you do. And they're using like examples that aren't relevant. And so we knew we were going to do something different. So a lot of the time we spend is how to create what we call mental models, or models around leadership concepts that are very memorable. And one of my favorite quotes around that is, Andy Stanley runs a big church here in Atlanta. He has this great saying. He says, what happens down the hall will always beat what's hanging on the wall. And a lot of times we hang the sayings up and stuff like that, but we're not modeling the things. And I find leaders they're frustrated because they know what they're trying to communicate to their people. They know what they want their people to do differently. And so, but they don't have a memorable way of teaching it to people. So the Four Faces of Frustration was a model we came up with that is memorable, first of all. And we teach leaders, both from an employee and a customer standpoint, how people act when they're frustrated. And the simple answer to that question is that when people are frustrated, they get mad, right? And that's true to an extent. 3 of the 4 styles transition through anger, though, into some other behavior. There's one particular style that stays angry. And so if you know anybody who's super angry, we call them reds. They look angry a lot. In their defense, they're really not angry. They're frustrated that things are not moving fast enough. And unfortunately for them, they're never moving fast enough. It's always going to be moving faster. So they're super easy to identify. And so we teach in the book how you deal with those people. How do you interact with them? Because when people are frustrated, it's easiest to understand what their communication style is. So reds just stay angry. The second one is yellows. And yellows, when they're frustrated, they might transition through anger, but then they start becoming very optimistic and telling you how it's all going to be fine. We're going to work through this. And we like to say they like to put the lipstick on the pig and tell you how everything's going to be awesome. And third one are the people who just start asking tons of questions. We call them blues. And they just start drilling down and asking you. And they get a bad rap for being pessimists. Because they are focused on all the things that could go wrong. But in their defense, it's because nobody else is focused on that, right? And the last one are what we call the greens, and they just get quiet. They just stop.
Quiet in a good way or quiet in a bad way?
Depends. But, they just stop talking because they're like, no one's listening to me. And what's the point of having a conversation if no one's going to listen? So the whole concept of the book is, look, you probably have people you manage that are that fall under one of these categories, or maybe many of these categories. And if you utilize the strategies that will work with you, they could very well be the exact opposite of what that person needs from you as a manager. And so because of that, you're actually mismanaging, not out of any deliberate methodology on your part, just because you don't know. So, and the same is true of your customers, right? So we actually did a large scale project at Progressive Insurance around this particular concept. And we trained most of their customer service supervisors who, handle the incoming calls for when people have got a claim. And we trained them how to recognize in a stressful situation like that, how that person wanted to be served. Because we found that
Power-
people tend to serve others the way they want to be served.
And that's
And
not always the
well,
correct way.
no, and you just think about the last time you called into a customer service.
Yeah.
Okay, they don't have customer service centers anymore, but when they used to have them, when you called in, right? Sometimes you got someone on the phone and they were awesome, and sometimes you got somebody on the phone and you just didn't connect with them.
Right.
And they were probably trying, but they were just not doing a great job.
Very fascinating. So when you go in and do your, I guess, well, let me ask you, maybe not assume. So you teach organizations the model, and then you look at their business operations or their jobs and apply that model to stressful situations that they encounter. Is that the idea?
Well, the four phases of frustration is a model that's nested within our leadership development process. So
Okay.
what we typically do is, whether it be an organization, a department, or an individual, what we want to really understand is, and this is probably where we're different than most leadership development groups, we want to know from a bottom line, why do you care? Like, why do you care if your leaders are developed? Like, what is it? What's the business result that should change if your leaders are more effective and better trained and skilled? And that's not a hard question for most operational leaders to
Answer.
share. In fact, one of our clients, the project we were just talking about, Progressive, they wanted to increase their net promoter score, which is a very caustic measure, of course, of
Right.
customer service, right? And so we're saying, fine. So if we're effective in this project, your NPS score should go up. All right. Now, most training groups do not want to commit to that kind of operational result. They want to, because
They're
that's
scared of not
dangerous.
meeting it. Or may not being able to measure what the
Yeah.
ROI is. Yeah.
So we want to know, we want to know what's that operational result. And then we want to figure out, well, what are the leadership skills that would support a change in that? What do we need the employees doing differently? What do the leaders need to be doing differently? How do we train them to do that? And then we measure the change at all those different levels, ultimately in terms of the business result. And when we do that with organizations, interestingly enough, the problem is not that they don't know what they want to measure. The problem is that they want to measure too much stuff. I always say they're like NASA. They've got dials everywhere. And I'm like, yeah, but what's the one thing? What's the one thing that you want to change? And they're like, they all have to change. And I'm like, well, how long have they all been in the tank? And they're like, well,
Yeah, great question.
At least 5 years. I'm like, well, and it doesn't all have to change right now then,
That's right.
So now, interestingly enough, the leadership behaviors that improve one metric, if you're truly working on foundational leadership behaviors, all the metrics end up improving. So
Yes,
it's not like
absolutely.
just one does, but we want to
Right.
measure one to see because if you try to measure 5 things, you just dilute your effort across a bunch of
Right.
different areas.
You get everybody focused on that one North Star goal,
Correct.
and then I'm sorry, I'm thinking and talking at the same time because I'm so impressed. Yeah, you get them all focused on that same goal, that same North Star, and that shows that instant ROI. And to your point, the other metrics will naturally improve because behavior has changed in a positive way
Correct.
to
Yes.
change the most critical measure that they've identified. I love that.
It's just simple, right?
It is very simple. And when you were going over the 4, I was trying to picture myself. I'm usually a glass half full kind of gal
Yep.
anyway, but I try to think about situations when I was angry with something that was going on at work. And if I had to put it on myself, I would guess I would be somewhere between a yellow and a blue, but probably more of a yellow.
You are definitely a yellow.
Am I yellow?
Yeah, you're completely a yellow, by the way. Yeah.
So if you were my manager and you knew that I was a yellow and you knew I was angry about, I don't know, the new implementation of a new technology, what might be one way to approach me if I'm a yellow?
Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges with yellows is I love the fact you're yellow. I got a lot of yellow in my personality too, Karen. But yellows are attracted to shiny objects. They sort
Yes,
of
I
bounce around a
am.
lot, and so what we have to recognize is with a yellow is they're very verbal. They have to talk things out to think them out quite often. Um,
Yes. Oh
and
my God,
so
that's me.
they think and talk at the same time. So if you say, just go away and think about that, the yellow's like, I don't want to go away and think about it. I want to think about it with you.
Yes,
Don't
yes.
leave them alone. They like to hear how they're doing.
Yeah,
Some of the other behavioral styles, if you compliment them too much on how they're doing, they're like, what do you think? I'm incompetent? Like, why do you think I
yeah,
need to be told? I don't need to be told. So it's not just when you're frustrated it's actually when people are frustrated that it's easiest to see their communication style,
that's true.
but it's actually that communication style is there. And obviously it's not the whole of who you are. Like
Yeah,
you're a very complicated person. You've got your background, your skills, your education, your value set,
yeah.
your
Worldview.
heritage. There's so much that makes up Karen, right? So this is just like a little piece of the puzzle, but it's an important piece because it actually ends up being the easiest thing to manage with someone is that you just modify your pace that you talk to them at, and
Yeah,
you modify how much you're engaging with them on the task versus people axis as well. Yellows are big people. They love to
they
meet
are.
people. They love to engage with people. They love to move quickly. They're
Yeah,
not big on detail. So one of the things we talk about in the book is we talk about the maturity spectrum on communication style, because every communication style has strengths and weaknesses. And you've probably heard the Peter principle, right? That
yeah,
you get promoted to your level of incompetence. And we have a different view on that. We actually say that what actually is happening when someone's promoted to their level of incompetence is that they have not developed the requisite skill to offset their weaknesses. So for a yellow, like you share that with me, it's attention to detail quite often, right?
yes,
So,
very much so.
so
But I
I,
have people on my team that I've hired that has
that's
that
right.
attention to
Right.
detail to balance me out.
So either you have to have the people or you have to have the systems, because
Yes,
now every communication style has different weaknesses. But if you are a yellow and you haven't developed that skill and that knowledge and either having the people or the systems, it'll bite you in the butt eventually and
yeah,
undermine your success. So it's not necessarily that you've reached a place you can't operate. It's that you've reached it without developing the requisite skill to support that next step in success.
absolutely. Andrew, I appreciate you letting me put my own self on the hot seat. What I love to do as much as we can on the podcast is kind of bring it home to people on get them curious about learning more. And I don't mind putting myself out there. And I will share when I put my coach hat on, if I was coaching me, I would also, and I was a new and I was a yellow, I would also try to, as a leader, help me find my place to help
Yeah.
assist in whatever this challenge or frustration or situation is, because I'll just talk about me. For yellows, that's why we turn to optimism so quickly. We want to be part of the
Yes.
efforts, but we want to make it for good. And we want to find quickly how we can personally contribute or how we can help the team contribute to get to a better place. And so if a leader can recognize that in
Yeah.
their individual, they can coach them one-on-one to give them a bit more hope, focus, and help them through whatever they're tackling. Correct or no?
Yeah. Absolutely.
We're
Absolutely.
co-coaching Karen here.
Yeah. And while that's true, there would be another employee where that would be the opposite of what they want.
Yes, quicksand for. They would hate that.
And they're like, yeah, why are you bugging me? Just let me go do my work. And there's at least two of the communication styles. What they want from their boss is their absence. To
Which
just
two
leave
of
me
those?
alone and let me do my job. When their boss shows up in their office, it's like, what I do wrong?
Let me be me. Huh? Just leave me alone. Huh?
Yeah, and in fairness, we don't just usually have one of these colors that make
Yeah,
us up. Usually, you have at least two, sometimes three.
a
But
little
there's
bit.
one is what we call our Achilles heel. It's the person that when we have to spend time interacting with people with that color, it actually saps us of energy, and we tend to do the opposite of what's necessary. I did a large scale study with a group one time. Did a couple of them, but one of them was I always ask. Who thinks they're married? We call it not the Achilles heel because that would be rude, but
Yeah.
we call it the shadow. It's your
Uh,
shadow, the people
I
you don't
love
understand.
that. The shadow.
And
Okay.
it's interesting. A lot of times we marry into our shadow. We marry the person that
Hmm.
is very different than us because it's super exciting at first. And then if you're not careful, over time we stop valuing that difference and we
Yeah,
start saying,
I
why
can
do you
see
do
that.
that? Well, I
Yeah.
always did it. Well, no, you didn't. Well, they did, maybe, or maybe they modified a little bit at first, but that's just who they are.
Right. Their
When I
nature.
first started studying this, this is many, many years ago. I did a report and I was putting it together and I brought it home and I showed it to my wife and I said, read this and tell me if you think this is me. And she said, she was reading it and she's looking at me and she's reading it. She looks at me and she says, wow, so this is you. And I'm like, that's what I'm trying to figure out. She said, well, I thought you were just trying to piss me off sometimes.
Oh, that
And
was her aha moment then.
And she's like, this is who you are. And I'm like, yeah, why would I ever want to annoy you? And she's like, I don't know, but you're really good at it sometimes, you know?
Oh, bless her heart.
So this is what happens in our most important relationships in our life. We don't sometimes understand that we're trying to make things better and we're making them worse.
We are.
Happens at work, happens at home, happens in the organizations we associate with. And yet you could have, in fact, some of your deepest, most valuable relationships will be with people who are so different than you. And this is already true in your life and it's true in everybody who's listening's life. So it's not that you can't get along with people in your shadow. You already do. You just have a relationship with them now. But when you first meet somebody, you have no relationship. All you have is the tension that you're not acting the way that they expect you to in the moment.
Absolutely. Well, listeners, if you're not online right now, going to Amazon trying to find this book, The Four Faces of Frustration, I don't know what else will inspire you because I am just fascinated with Andrew's model and how he weaves that into the larger leadership development space. But sorry, Andrew, we're running short on time, but we cannot let you sneak out of here without asking you our signature question. And we already talked about the research, but out of the 7 buckets on leadership execution that came out of our research survey, the one that really resonated with you so kind to share, was leading with a drive for result.
Yes.
And for my new listeners out there, a drive for results is just what it sounds like. It's all about being very focused and tenacious about ensuring that your end goals are achieved, even if you have to pivot along the way. So curious minds would love to know, Andrew, why did leading with a drive for results really resonate with you?
Yeah, and thank you, Karen, for that. And when I looked at your model, I was like, well, it's not one, right?
I know it's like all 7.
It can't just be one. But
right.
But if I was going to speak to one, I would say that as a leader, you have to have a drive for results. And the thing that will get you in trouble the fastest is not getting results. Now, the caveat to that is that the results come as a function of doing a lot of stuff. So you have to have that drive for results, but the drive for the results has to be like, that's the thing you want, but the stuff you do is going to change based on what you're trying to achieve. So you can't, it's like the measuring stick. So you got to have it. You got to have that drive. The most successful leaders I see have that drive. And I'd wrap it up like this. One of my first mentors was a gentleman by the name of Bob Proctor, and he's no longer with us, but Bob was a giant in the personal growth and development space. And he had this great saying. He said, profit is not the purpose of any business, but it is the first order of business. In other words, you have to make a profit. You have to get results. If you don't get to stick around, but it's not the purpose. And so as leaders, what I would challenge your audience to think about, well, what is my purpose? Like, why am I doing what I'm doing? If you're doing it just to get results, then you're probably not going to lead very effectively, especially in the new environment we find ourselves in with people who are looking for purpose. And the research shows that young people today would work harder, will work harder for a purpose than a paycheck.
Absolutely.
Now, don't get me wrong. They want the paycheck.
They want to pay the bills. Yep.
but they want to know why. Why am I doing this? Which just somebody who's maybe my age is like, what do you mean why? Just do your job.
Just do it.
I get leaders who say that to me, just do your job. I'm like, they will. If you connect it to a higher purpose of why it's important, and so that's a lot of the work we do with clients is helping them figure out, pull out from within, because it's already there, right?
Right.
How do we connect the purpose to the results? Because when you do that, people will be inspired and want to be engaged and want to work hard. And you won't have to worry about a lot of the stuff that you're trying to do in the
That's
background
right. It'll
otherwise.
come naturally. Well, awesome, Andrew. Well, we're going to have a ton of information about you, your company, and where to find you in our show notes, obviously. But I always love to give just a tad bit of airtime to you to let our listeners know and hear on the spot where they can find and learn more about you, the Oxley Group, and how to get your book.
Yeah, so the book is on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon, you search for The 4 Faces of Frustration, How to Turn Frustration into Delight. You'll find that there. We're on LinkedIn, Andrew Oxley. We're also on Facebook, the Oxley Group.
Nice.
You can find us in all sorts of different places. And if you want more information on us, send us an email at info@transformingresults.com. It's always very confusing. If you put the oxleygroup.com in, it's going to pull up a defense contractor. That is not us.
Okay. Good to know.
We're in competition with them for that particular domain. So we put our domain as transformingresults.com.
I love that.
And we've got all sorts of information, free blog articles up there. One of our favorite ones that people are downloading right now is how to make the subjective objective, because a lot of times people are trying to provide feedback to people, but it's subjective in nature. It's not something you can put a hard measure on. And so we have an article up there about how to provide subjective feedback. So if we can help out your audience in any way, we'd love to do it.
Oh, that sounds amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for the gift of your time. This has been a blast. I took a million notes. I'm sure my listeners did as well. And we so appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Karen.
And thank you too, listeners, for the gift of your time as well, because we know there are literally millions of other podcasts out there that you could be listening to, and we do not take your patronage lightly. All that we ask is that you please subscribe to our podcast and share it with just one friend, because by doing so, it'll help us all to better lead at the top of our game. Thanks so much, and see you next week. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we help you lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. You can check out the show notes, additional episodes, bonus resources, and also submit guest recommendations on our website at leadyourgamepodcast.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn by searching for the name Karen Rhodes, with Karen being spelled Karan. And if you like the show, the greatest gift you can give would be to subscribe and leave a rating on your podcast platform of choice. This podcast has been a production of Shockingly Different Leadership, a global consultancy which helps organizations execute their people, talent development, and organizational effectiveness initiatives on an on-demand project or contract basis. Huge thanks to our production and editing team for a job well done. Goodbye for now.